It's not long now until we're all going to have a chance to play DC Dual Force. This coming weekend, some streamers are going to get a chance to play the game, including myself, and just 1 week later, the public will have access to the game through a limited beta period. So it felt like a good time to put out a beginner's guide to DC Dual Force. This is going to go over everything you could possibly need to know about DC Dual Force. Some stuff we've already talked about, but I think most of this video you're going to be hearing for the first time. In this video, we're going to cover the game's resource system, all of the keywords, unique mechanics you might not be aware of, the charge system, what deck building is like, and what deck building restrictions exist inside the game currently, how card generation works. Pretty much this is your one-stop shop for all things DC Dual Force. I hope you learned something. Let's get into it. In the center of your 3x2 grid, your little area of the game board, you've got two little symbols here. These symbols are your resources. In this example, they're blacked out. That means you don't have any resources. And that's how you're going to start the game. But at the beginning of your first turn, you're going to get one bronze resource. You can spend a bronze resource playing any bronze card in the game. Then come the beginning of your next turn, whatever leftover resources you have will be eliminated, and you'll start the turn off with two bronze resources. So now you're free to play any two bronze cards in your hand. This process will continue. You'll get a silver and a bronze resource the following turn, then a silver and a silver resource, then finally a gold and silver resource on turn 5. On turn 6, you will not progress to two golden resources. You max cap out at exactly one gold resource and one silver resource. There are other cards in the game that let you generate resources, and if you generate a resource, that resource is added on top of your existing resources. So let's say, for example, we're on turn 2 and we have access to our two bronze resources and we have a Green Lantern power ring. We can play that power ring. It'll use up one of our bronze resources and then generate us two more. So we'll now have 3 bronze resources. I don't know what that will look like on the UI, but I can confirm that that is indeed how that works. All right, with resources out of the way, I think it's time we jump onto some keywords. We're going to go in alphabetical order, starting off with Adrenaline. Adrenaline reads, while your hand is empty, this ability is active. The easiest card to look at for this is Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn reads end, Adrenaline, draw a card. So if at the end of your turn, your hand would be empty, you will draw a card. Ambush. Ambush reads, if this character KOs a character it attacks, it does not take damage back. There's no retaliate damage if you manage to successfully kill off a target. For an example, if an Azrael was to attack into, I don't know, let's say a John Diggle, Azrael will attack, destroy him, and now Azrael will not receive any damage, where any other unit without ambush would have taken 2 damage as a result of attacking into John Diggle. Aura. The next time this character would be affected by an enemy's ability or action, it isn't. Just as a friendly reminder that actions is what you've probably referred to in other card games as spells or instants. And the ability section of this keyword is specifically referring to leader abilities. It's worth mentioning that if a leader's ability involves gaining attack and then they attack into a recruit that has aura is not going to save that recruit from that attack, because the thing that is affecting them is the attack from that leader, not the ability. Deploy. When this card enters the battlefield, activate this ability. Just an interesting note, this keyword does not refer to playing a card from your hand, which means if the card is to enter the battlefield through any method, it will resolve its deploy ability, and just means when your turn ends, resolve this ability. Firepower. Your cards and abilities deal additional non-combat damage equal to your total firepower. Yes, this includes action cards, recruits with abilities that deal damage, and leader abilities. Evade. The next time this character is attacked, the attack is avoided. That means no damage is dealt on either side. The attacker does not receive damage, and the person being attacked does not receive damage. So effectively, an evade unit just chews up an attack without having to actually be attacked. Flurry reads, can attack twice each turn. Guard. Your front row characters with guard protect all other friendly characters. You've probably had a keyword like this in another card game you've played, but something that's interesting about this keyword in this card game is that the guard character needs to be played on the front row. So if you've got a strong guard card in your hand, but for whatever reason you don't want that guard to be active, you can always just play that card on the back row to prevent guard from being active. Hidden. Can't be the target of enemy attacks, actions, or abilities, and doesn't protect other characters. Hidden is removed at the start of your turn. Hunter can attack hidden and otherwise protected characters. That means if you've got a blocker in front of your leader, it's going to be no match for a hunter character because the hunter character can go right over the top of any blocker, and of course it can target hidden units. Invincible can't be damaged or KO'd. Lethal KO any recruit this card damages. Parting shot. When this character is KO'd, activate this ability. This does not resolve when the character is replaced. More about replacing in the next section of this video. Shield. The next time this character would be damaged, prevent it. Speed. Can attack on the turn it's deployed, and start when your turn starts, this ability activates. I do also want to mention, even though it's not technically a keyword, Seek. By default, Seek will show you 3 different options, and you'll pick one of those options, create it, and put it into your hand. The reason Seek is not a keyword is because it's a little bit more flexible than that. For example, Batman has the word Seek in his ability, but it only shows you 2 different options. Here are some other terms that aren't exactly keywords that I want to go over really quickly. Bonus attack. If a card has bonus attack, their first attack will not exhaust them. In addition to that, a bonus attack can be made by a unit that is already exhausted. Everywhere. Everywhere affects cards in all zones. That includes your hand, deck, and battlefield, but it also includes cards that are created at a later date. For example, if you use Aquaman's ability on turn 3, when you use Aquaman's ability again on turn 6, the newly created sea creature will not only have +1/+1 from that activation, but will also have +1/+1 from the previous activation. If a card says that it's going to sacrifice a character, it'll KO a friendly character even if they're invincible or would otherwise be protected for whatever reason. Summon. We haven't got the chance to talk about this in a video yet, but if a card specifically says that it's summoning something, so in the case of, again, Aquaman, we'll continue to bring up Aquaman because he's an easy example, that summon creates a new card and deploys it at a random space. So if you have 3 spaces open, you can't control where that sea creature is going to land, it's just going to land somewhere. I also want to go over some deck building stuff because I think some people are a bit lost on that. In DC Duel Force, the very first thing you do is select 2 leaders. You can either select 2 leaders from the same faction or 1 leader from one faction and 1 leader from another. If you select 2 leaders from the same faction, your entire deck must be made up of 40 cards from that faction. You can run 2 copies of any card, with the exception of ultimate cards, which can be identified by this yellow rarity gem in the middle of their card. You can only run 1 copy per ultimate card. That doesn't mean you can't run 2 ultimate cards, it just means you can't run 2 copies of that same ultimate card. If you pick 1 leader from one faction and another leader from another faction, you must have an even split of 20 cards from each of those factions. That means you can't have 18 cards from one faction and 22 cards from another. It must be exactly 20/20. The win condition in Duel Force is removing all enemy leaders, not just the 2 default leaders that the opponent starts off with. If the opponent manages to get in play another leader, there are currently 2 ways to do this: Heart of Darkness and Unexpected Help. In either case, you must remove that newly created leader and both of their default leaders. The maximum hand size in DC Duel Force is 10 cards. If you go to draw from an empty deck, you lose the game. Outside of external effects that generate your charge, you can only gain 1 charge per turn on each of your leaders. However, you can't sit there and stack up as much charge as possible to use the same leader ability multiple times a turn, because leader abilities are hard limited to once per turn per leader. So you could use Cyborg and Aquaman's ability in the same turn, but you couldn't use 2 activations of Cyborg's ability. In DC Duel Force, you have the ability to replace recruits that are on your battlefield. Let's say, for example, you've got a really strong card on your backline, and you've got some other random cards on your front line, and your opponent plays a card like Straitjacket on your card that's on the back line. Now what do? Your board's full, you can't play any cards. Well, thankfully they've built in a mechanic to directly counter situations like this. If you're playing a recruit from your hand, you may do so replacing a recruit on your board, but it won't trigger any parting shot effects or anything that would otherwise trigger when a card is destroyed, because technically the card's not getting quote-unquote destroyed, it's just getting replaced. Speaking of full board spaces, if you do have a full board and you try to summon a card using some type of external effect, we'll use Aquaman again as an evergreen example, the card will have nowhere to summon and it will simply be destroyed, but the rest of the effect can still resolve. So if you had a full board of sea creatures, but you still wanted to give them all +1/+1, you could do that with Aquaman's effect, but you wouldn't get a new sea creature. If your board is empty and you try to play a card like Miss Martian or Mordru, they will target themselves. So Miss Martian would come into play and then return herself to hand, and Mordru would simply destroy himself. Generation effects will be generated from a global pool of cards. So if you were to use a card like Flex, who generates a random bronze action, that action will be pulled from every single faction in the game, not just the Might faction or not just your available factions. It will pull from everything. Okay, that's pretty much everything I could think to go over for DC Duel Force's mechanics, stuff that might not be immediately clear and things that aren't necessarily gone over in any publicly available documentation or anything like that. Hopefully that answers some questions for you, and hopefully it wasn't too all over the place. Thank you for all of the support recently on all the DC Duel Force stuff. Keep being awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.